Hello everyone, welcome back to another session by K21 Academy. Today our expert trainer will be discussing about security services in AWS. So let's get into the video.
So now we're gonna discuss about various. Till now we understood few of the security threats, few of the security vulnerabilities, few of the security consideration what AWS has to offer, few of the security posture, what is the shared responsibility model in AWS, so on and so forth. Now we also understood that not everything AWS is responsible. So we are also responsible implementing a security on AWS. Now, as I said in the beginning, AWS provides you all the necessary services and tools for safeguarding your application and data on AWS. It is your responsibility to implement them, configure them, and use them. Right now, what we're gonna do now is we're gonna understand the what are all the services which are which is capable of taking care of certain security aspects, right? So this is very important. So everybody must be aware. Let's say if somebody asks you for a particular infrastructure protection, what service on AWS, you should be able to tell that. So what we're going to do, we're going to briefly go through the names of the services or the list of the services what AWS has to offer with respect to security. First is identity and access management. What do you mean by identity and access management? So, as you know, it's an IT resources, so we should grant an access to different, as you know, that it is not the only one person working in your account or a one person working on a particular project. You'll have n number of developers, database administrators, testers, architects, right? So we need to grant them an access to the IT resources. So in that case, we have something called identity and access management, which will take care of providing the authentication and authorization to your services and your account or in your IT resources, right? For this particular category, identity and access management. So for the first and foremost thing is we have a service called IAM, which stands for AWS Identity and Access Management Service. So which will take care of providing the authentication and authorization to the services and resources of your AWS. Now everybody have created your root account, right? Your root account, you created an AWS account, AWS free tier account. Now consider that is an account to develop an application. Now in that case, to develop an application, you're not the only person who can do that. You need a team. Now, for the team to work, everybody to collaborate, we need to provide them an access to the services and resources. So how do you provide an access to different users to your account? So that is done through an IAM. So here what will happen is you will have an you will be able to create a user called IAM user, and from through the IAM user you'll have to grant them a permission to what all services you want to grant them a permission, and they can log into your account and they can access those services. So this is how it works, and IAM is the service which will take care of the like identification, authentication, and authorization for the users to log into your AWS account or to access your AWS services and AWS resources. So Notif is asking, does AWS provide uh, privileged access management? Yes. So privileged access management is within the IAM itself. You have a privileged access management where in AWS we follow a least privileged access policy where the access is given only to the users as much as it is required and nothing more than that. So we're going to have a privileged access management setup for it. So privileged access management is within IAM. So we have a we do not call it as a privileged access management. We have a certain policies within that through which a privileged access management can be done. Clear? So the first service with respect to the identity and access management is what we have is AWS IAM. So next service what we have is called AWS single sign-on. So that is a single sign-on service from the AWS side. You can consider that it is not only a example of multiple AWS account. It can be a multiple software application as well. So I'll give you a scenario where you are a security engineer, where you are for your company, where you need to take care of the security of multiple AWS accounts and a few other tools like Jenkins, and you have Amazon account, a couple of Amazon accounts, and let's say one more tool called Splunk software. Now all these softwares, you will have to maintain the security of it. So in that case, you cannot it is not feasible to have different credentials, username and password for each of the software. You log in every time, you log in every time, and then connect to that respective software, check the security posture, then log out, log in, and remember each and different credentials for each of the software. Right? In order to follow this, there is something called single sign-on, where single credentials will be used to connect to each of the software or each of the multiple AWS account. Right? So where my username and password remains the same. So whichever the URL I hit, if I hit the Jenkins URL, so it'll ask me for the credentials, which is the same I'll have to provide. If I hit the Amazon URL, it'll ask me for the credentials, which is the same URL, same credentials I'm going to use. If I hit the Splunk URL, again it'll ask me for the credentials, and I'll have to use the same credentials. This particular concept is called a single sign-on, right? So it has been implemented in almost all of your company wherever you guys are working internally as well, where for different tools like HR tool, your compensation tool, your internal policy tool, your reimbursement tool, or a internal Wikipedia tool. So all of these tools, whenever you're logging in, so you provide only one credential, that is your main username and password, and nothing else. How is that done? That is done by different software of single sign-on. It has been done. There are several single sign-on softwares like Ping ID, open source single sign-on software like Ping ID, Okta. You must have heard about these tools or services. But from the AWS side, from the AWS side also provides you a solution for a single sign-on. That is, we have AWS single sign-on service. It supports certain range of application and multiple AWS account sign-on as well, and you can use a single sign-on service from the AWS side. Now, the next service what we have is called Amazon Cognito. Now, Amazon Cognito is a service for managing your identity management for your application. Now, I know some of you are getting confused. So, IAM is and this is also very important with respect to your interview and in your examination. IAM IAM service is for maintaining the identity for your AWS account, like accessing your services like EC2, S3, RDS, and so on. And Amazon Cognito is for the application level identity management. Like for example, you developed an application on Amazon, and in that application, you need to have a certain users to sign in and then maintain their identities, and those users can access that particular web application or an application. So for that, the identity management for the application is can be handled by a service called Amazon Cognito. Okay, I'll repeat that. So Amazon Cognito is a service to maintain the identities for the application you built on AWS or any third-party application. Let's say I build an application like Instagram on AWS, or an Instagram like of kind of an application, where for Instagram everybody of you log in through your username and password, right? Now your identity has to be maintained somewhere. So for that we need an identity management. So that part will be taken care by Amazon Cognito. So which takes care of your sign up process, login process, and so on. For that we use Amazon Cognito. Clear? Next service is a directory service. Now, as you all know, in all the enterprise organization, you are the employees, and all of your identity is saved somewhere where your username and passwords are verified, and it will allow you to log in. So those are called active directories. So the most commonly used active directory is Microsoft Active Directory, where most of the companies uses Microsoft Active Directory to store all of your identities. in a very large scale. So you know they'll have thousands of employees, 10,000s of employees, hundred thousands of employees, where all the employees' identity will be stored there, and whenever they get on offboarded, their identity will be deleted from there. Right? This identity management for the enterprises is being done by a directory that is called as Microsoft Active Directory. So Microsoft Active Directory is a Microsoft product, right? Where you'll have to purchase that from the Microsoft suite, and then you'll have to implement in your organization, right? So this is majorly if you want to manage your enterprise identity management of your company. From the AWS side, AWS also provide you something called AWS Directory Service, where it will give you a managed Microsoft Directory service for you, where you can also create a directory from the AWS console, and they can manage this directory for your particular organization as well. So as I said in the beginning, when you come to AWS, you don't have to worry about anything. So even if you want to have an identity management for your entire organization, you can use AWS Directory Service to provide a managed Microsoft Active Directory to maintain the identity of the users. Now, next a set of services is for the infrastructure protection. So infrastructure is something like you have an AWS services. What do you call an infrastructure? Let's say to run my application, I need an EC2 server and a database server like RDS. So what I'll do, I'll go ahead and spin up a EC2 server. I go ahead and spin up an RDS server. So that particular the underlying model, underlying services, we call it as an infrastructure. And for the infrastructure protection, what all we have? For the infrastructure protection with respect to network security, we have AWS Network Firewall. So where the traffic which is coming in and out of your AWS network. So see there will be a AWS network. Above AWS network, there will be a global network. If somebody wants to communicate to the AWS, so from the global network, they will have to communicate to the AWS network. Now, what all communication is allowed, what all protocols are allowed, what are the IP address are allowed to communicate with AWS network, you can define them in the AWS network firewall, saying that this communication is allowed, this communication is not allowed. Right? With respect to security, what is allowed, what is not allowed can be defined in the AWS network firewall. Next, with respect to DDoS protection, we know that one of the major threat is a distributed denial of service. So for that, we have a dedicated service called AWS Shield, which will help you to set up a mechanism in your architecture to protect your application against the denial of service, right? So they will have all the mitigation technique. They will have the response team, DDoS response team, to support you if something goes wrong. And AWS Shield is going to make sure that the DDoS attack is not going to happen by implementing several mechanisms with that. So we have a dedicated service for DDoS protection, that is AWS Shield. So in the application level, in the web application level, if you want to filter any malicious web traffic, we also have a AWS WAF, that is a web application firewall, where wherein you can define what kind of network can come into your application or a web application, and from what IP address, and what request can be blocked, what request can be allowed, and SQL injection is allowed or not, or any particular variables is allowed in the request URL or not. All of these things can be defined and configured in the AWS Web Application Firewall, which will filter out any malicious web traffic coming into your application. Next, we have our AWS Firewall Manager, which is gonna centrally manage the firewall rules. So we have several firewalls in AWS. So these are the two firewalls to name a few, but internally at a different network layer we have a different firewalls. So managing all those firewalls centrally will be helpful. For that, we have a AWS Firewall Manager, which is going to centrally manage all the firewalls in different layers of your network. So these services will come under infrastructure protection, majorly towards the network protection of your AWS. Next, data protection. So whenever you store a data into AWS, we have several services for the data protection. The first one is something called Amazon Messi. So Amazon Messi is a service that will protect your sensitive data at scale. Now, as you know that varying from a medium size company to a large scale company, so it'll have huge number of data. Every company will having, it'll be petabytes of data, terabytes of data, right? Now just imagine terabytes and exabytes of data is there. In that, you will have to identify which of them are sensitive data, and you will have to protect them. So is it practically possible? Of course not, right? Because every company will have a huge amount of data. In that, which data is sensitive data, which data is a critical data, and whether it is secure or not, whether you made it public or not, that can be easily analyzed by a service called Amazon Messi. So what does Amazon Messi does? It is going to analyze all the data what you have stored, and then it is going to identify which of them are a sensitive data, and identify if there is any vulnerability that you by mistake made them public or intentionally made them public or anything as such. It will give you findings where you'll have to understand whether you had this is majorly for a data stored in S3, this particular service. So because in S3 we have an option to make the data public, right? So that is the reason we have Amazon Messi to verify it. And if you had made any private data or a sensitive data as a public, it will notify you. It'll give you an inform. It'll give you a findings with a severity level. Then you can take an action accordingly. So the next service with respect to the data protection, what we have is an AWS KMS. That is a key management service. Now, as you know that the data, the major way of protecting a data is encrypting the data when it is stored. Now, for the encryption, there are several encryption mechanism, right? The synchronous encryption, asynchronous encryption. For that, we need a key. So the key, the key, depending on a certain standards, the key can be provided. So the providing the key, provisioning the key, and managing and storing the key can be taken care by a service called KMS, which is a fully managed service from AWS side, where you can easily manage the servers required for it. You can easily store the keys, and you can easily rotate the keys as well. So that is called KMS. And for the same purpose, we also have AWS Cloud HSM. So this is hardware-based key storage for a regulatory compliance, where in the Cloud HSM, all the servers required for provisioning the key and maintaining and storing the key has to be managed by yourself. So Cloud HSM stands for Hardware Security Model, AWS Cloud Hardware Security Model, where so we have a Cloud HSM where some of the companies what they want is they want to maintain the hardware which is providing the keys, which is storing the key. They cannot rely on a managed services as per their compliance. So for them, we have a Cloud HSM which is gonna help you to set up your own servers on AWS and manage them and maintain them. So for that, we have Cloud HSM. So both of them are majorly used for an encryption and decryption process. And we have AWS Certificate Manager. Now, as you know that encryption at rest is one part. We also have to encrypt the data at transit as well. So whenever the data is moving over the network, it has to be encrypted as well. So that is called encryption at transit. For encryption at transit, we would need a standard certificate for SSL and TLS standard certificate. So that certificates are managed and stored in a service called AWS Certificate Manager, where this is a service which will help you to provision a certificate and manage a certificate for your domain. So SSL certificate and TLS certificate can be managed in AWS Certificate Manager. And we also have a secret manager, which is called AWS Secret Manager, where all your credentials for your database or any servers or any applications or any software can be stored here. It can be easily stored and easily managed and easily retrieve the secrets, and you can also rotate the secrets here. At the same time, you can call it in the runtime and fetch it in the runtime, and then you don't have to hard code these particular credentials in your codes or in your programs. So these are the services with respect to data protection. Okay. Next thing is threat detection. So there are a lot of threats will be there all around, and which is which has been flowing in and out of your application or AWS account. And how do you identify that it is a threat? So for that, we have a threat detection services. The first one is AWS Security Hub, where it will give you a complete holistic view of your AWS account, where you can set up your security and compliance rules there, right? With respect to compliance and governance for an individual account, AWS Security Hub is one of the service which will give you holistic control on your account. Apart from that, we have something called Guard Duty. So this is the managed threat detection service in your account. So what it does is it is going to analyze once you enable it, it is going to continuously analyze all the logs, that is your DNS logs, the VPC logs, and the CloudWatch logs and the CloudTrail logs, all the monitoring logs, and it is going to identify if there is any threat in those logs, or is there any threat in your account. Let's say somebody there is a network flow which is happening which is not supposed to happen, the network spike which is happening which is not supposed to happen, there is certain unauthorized person is trying to attempt to access your AWS account multiple times. So all of those will be identified in a service called Amazon Guard Duty. So Amazon Guard Duty is one of the service which will help you to identify if there is any threats in your account. So it will give you a listing, it will give you a finding, so you can view those findings and implement the action accordingly, and then you can safeguard your. So whatever the threats it identifies, which means that there are certain vulnerabilities in your system, you just need to fix that in order to avoid any risk in the future. So next service what we have is called AWS Config, which will help you to record and evaluate your configuration for your AWS resources. When you have several AWS resources, the configuration part of it also matters, right? If your configuration is weak, again, it is going to lead to a security problem. So AWS configuration will help you to record and evaluate your configuration of your AWS resources, right? And it is one of the service which will help you to implement a certain compliance with respect to the configuration, certain governance with respect to the configuration, saying that this is how the resource has to be created with this particular specification, nothing more, nothing less. All of those rules can be implemented in AWS config, where all the configuration rules can be decided. Next, what we have is AWS CloudTrail. So AWS CloudTrail is a service which will record all the activity which is happening in your AWS account, right? As I said, whatever you do, whatever any of your IAM user, you access it from an API or an SDK, however you access your AWS account, whatever the activity you take care, whatever the activity you do it on AWS account, every activity will be captured by a service called AWS CloudTrail. So every activity will be captured, and you will be able to see those details on the CloudTrail dashboard. And we also have an AWS IoT device definer. This is for the IoT application, for the IoT devices, whatever you connect into your AWS account. So for them, so security management is being done by IoT device definer. So coming to the incident response and compliances. So if certain incident happens, what do you have to respond? How do you have to respond? So investigate potential security issues. For that incident response, we have to investigate the potential security issues. We have Amazon Detective Service, which is going to identify if there is a potential security issues. And we also have a disaster recovery service, the Cloud Endure Disaster Recovery, which is a fast, automated, cost-effective disaster recovery process. If something goes wrong, how you have to come out of the disaster, how you have to work with that disaster. It can be done by a Cloud Endure Disaster Recovery Service. Coming to the compliance, we have AWS Artifact to store the compliance reports. And we also have AWS Audit Manager, which is going to completely audit your AWS usage to simplify how you access, how you assess the risk and compliance. Where, as you know, the auditing keeps on happening for every project team or any software team. So, though we have Audit Manager, which is going to continuously audit your AWS usage to simplify how you assess risk and compliances. So these are the various services with respect to incident response and compliance.
So, guys, this was our expert from Team K21 Academy. And if in case you missed upon any concepts that were discussed, or if you want to have a deeper dive, then we have something really special for you. we have our free class on AWS Security Specialty, Certification and Demo. And under this free class, we will be discussing about cloud for security professionals, what and why, different services in AWS cloud security, demo, 25 plus hands-on labs, and whatnot. So if you want to attend this class, then let me just show you a brief demo. All you have to do is just log on to k21academy.com/AWS SEC02, and you'll be seeing this kind of interface where you have to just click on book your free seat now and select an event date, enter your name, your email address, your phone number, and click on yes, save my seat. Moving ahead, you'll be seeing this kind of interface where you see this link on the extreme right. Just save that link, add it to your calendars, and I'll see you in this free class. Till then, keep learning.